What's good, people? So, yes, first and foremost, I am wearing a flag. I did get this as a gift from some students of mine who clearly have too much time, but I quite like it, if I'm honest. I'm not sure if it's my color, but it's all right. So we're going to try and wear it during the video, and hopefully it's not too much of a distraction. But the point of the video is this: how to revise. And I'm going to be specifically speaking from a place of RE in citizenship, which will have obvious links to subjects like history, geography, sociology, basically other humanities subjects, and seeing how that goes. But it can be applied to other subjects as well, right? And how this came about is, as a teacher, I'm a little bit, especially as a head of department, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to teaching, trying to find new and innovative ways to break things down, to make things easier. That's the job, right? And as we were approaching mock exams, one of the things I started to think about was, how do we actually get students to strategize how they revise? How can we put it in a way that makes it easy for them to figure out what works for me, what can I continue doing, and also how can I get the best possible results and maximize the impact of the revision resources that I've chosen to use. Now, being a bit of a nerd, some research. Thank you to the EEF, if you can see them in the top there, and came across a resource where they basically were able to rank the effectiveness, based on research, of course, of different types of revision. Now, let me start off this video / explanation with a caveat. These are meant to be used preferably together, okay? Not just on their own. So, for example, you don't just want to use flashcards to revise everything, and that's the only method of revision that you use without using, for example, revision grids or practice papers, okay? You want to be able to use these all together, right? But that being said, decided to come up with a strategy to help people figure out how they revise. And so this is what has happened as a result. It's the RCP method, okay? So retrieval, content, and practice. Okay, and with retrieval, that's basically about being able to quickly remember what it is that you have learned. Okay, content is about revisiting content that maybe you have forgotten or need to practice again, and then, or not even practice again, just remember again. And then obviously we've got practice at the end, which is where you then learn to apply what you have remembered and what you have learned under a practice setting. Okay, and we're going to go through how that all works and what are the different types of revision that you can use for each of them. Now, it's worthwhile noting that they do go up in scale in terms of their effectiveness, but once again, they're meant to be used all together. So the first thing that you want to do is the retrieval. Now, different ways in which you can revise retrieval practice, which is basically recovering either things that you may have forgotten or haven't revisited in a long time. Okay, what you might notice, especially in schools that I've taught in, is that a lot of teachers will use retrieval practice usually for do nows, because it helps them it helps students to remember content from maybe earlier on in the course, earlier on in the unit, or to remember specific information from back in the unit or course that is relevant to that lesson, which is a really useful thing to do when it comes to citizenship and RE. But I digress. So retrieval, different things that you can do. Flashcards are an easy one. Super easy. Little notes. Usually you can, depending on the subject and the exam board, you can buy flashcards ready-made, which you can use to quiz yourself or get someone to quiz you. You've got quizzes, a lot of online platforms, including Seneca, which I'll come on to in a minute. You can quiz yourself to try and remember the content that you may have thought you have forgotten, which is more often the case than not. It's not that you don't know, it's just that you've forgotten that you know, which is hence the point of retrieval. Okay, so quizzes are a really useful, low-stakes way of trying to remember what you've forgotten. The next two are to be used in conjunction with the second part, which is the content, but we'll get to that in a second. But what you can do with revision grids or clocks and concept maps is that you can basically, within the set time, and we'll come to the time in a minute because that is important, within the set time, so let's say 5 minutes, try and write down everything you can remember about that particular unit or that paper, etc. Whatever you've put on that revision clock, try and write down as much as you can remember without any aids, okay? The same thing goes for concept maps, okay? So that's the first part, retrieval, trying to remember and revise the things that you believe, or not even believe, things that you may not have come across in quite some time, or just to quiz yourself to make sure that you know, usually key terms, key themes, those are the sorts of things you want to be able to revise quickly. Secondly, we have the content. Now, this is the better form of revision, okay? Here's what you can do when it comes to revising content. The first two, before we come back to the ones that are in green, Seneca and Bite Size. I'm a big advocate for Seneca. One, because it's free for students, wonderful free resource there, and it has pretty much most of your subjects and most of the exam boards, easy to access, easy to use, because you can use it from anything from your mobile phones to your Xboxes and your PlayStations, anything, iPads as well. Seneca does have an app that you can use. So long story short, Seneca's a great resource just to revise content. Bite Size is the same, slightly more limited in terms of subjects and exam boards, but it is still a wonderful resource because you can go through the information and then quiz yourself at the end. And if you're using the app, it does have a revise or quiz option or flashcard option, which is great. The green options, so going back to the revision grids / clocks and the concept maps. Once you've done your small limited time where you are retrieving everything that you have forgotten, what you then want to do is to complete using either YouTube videos, podcasts. So for example, I've got podcasts that explore some of the content, or your exercise book. But basically what you then want to do is once you've done your retrieval of those two methods, go back over those two methods and fill them in using information from those different sources. Okay, so it's one way of revision, but you've done it twice and you've just expanded upon it using different resources. So that's the second way of revision, or the second step of revision. So we've got retrieval, which is the quick stuff to remind yourself about, quick methods of revision to remind yourself about key terms, etc., etc. Then you've got content, which is to go over content that you may have forgotten. And then finally, practice, which is the best way to revise. Okay, but once again, it does require you to have gone over the content and try to quiz yourself so that you already are in that mind frame of, okay, cool, I do know this stuff, I'm ready for the exam. I know my content, I've remembered my key terms, and I'm ready for the exam. Easy two ways for that: practice papers, and if you've got revision guides, a lot of revision guides will have exam questions in them. If you're lucky, they might even have a mark scheme so that you can self-assess your answers. Okay? When it comes to timing, this is the last part and also the most important part. A lot of people, when they think about revision, they think they've got to revise for 2 to 3, 4 hours at a go on one subject. Your brain is like a muscle. It needs time for it to be under pressure, but then also there needs time to relax if it's effectively going to help you grow. That's why, for example, retrievals are a good way to revise, because it helps you to be under pressure and then to relax. Okay? So here's how you want to sort of break down the timings for the RCP method. Retrieval, you want to spend, let's break it down. Let's go back a bit actually. You want to spend either one of two options when it comes to revising a unit, if not subject. The first method, or the first amount of time you want to spend on a subject, is 30 minutes. Okay, 30 minutes or 1 hour. Those are the two times depending on whatever you're revising and how many subjects you feel you have to revise. Okay, no longer than an hour, no less than half an hour per unit / subject. Here's how you want to break it down. The first 5 minutes, if you're doing half an hour for retrieval. If it's an hour, 10 minutes. For content, you then revise for 10 minutes or 20 minutes if you want to give yourself more time. That will be probably a bit more useful, especially if you're using the likes of YouTube or podcasts to help supplement your revision grids or your concept maps. The last one, when it comes to practice, if you're doing half an hour, 15 minutes, that's it. Right? If you, for example, you're doing an RE exam, let's say you're revising Christian beliefs. 15 minutes is either question A, B, and C, or the 15-mark question at the end that you can just practice on by itself and then reflect upon and self-assess afterwards. Okay? If it's an hour, you're then giving yourself 30 minutes, which is effectively the Christian belief section of the paper or the Christian practices section of the paper. But what you're doing is, rather than having to do all of it in one go, you're giving yourself time to quiz yourself, to remember the things that you may have forgotten. You're giving yourself time with the content to go over and fill in the gaps in your knowledge in slightly more detail. And then at the end, you're practicing the things that you've gone over and revised under exam conditions. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, you have to write according to time. Okay, so once again, just to recap, we're going over the RCP method: retrieval, content, practice. There's different ways in which you can do each of those. On that note, good luck and God bless.